eyewitness. Joining us now, Michael Rubin of the American Enterprise Institute and Peter Brookes of the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on a difficult day. Michael, your read, early as it is, on the situation right now.
Well, one of the issues I think we need to think about is if this was a shoot down from below, what technology exists to prevent this from happening again? Because we may be seeing a window into the future, especially with the proliferation of surface-to-air missiles, which have gone missing in Libya and so forth. The only airline that I'm aware of that equips its civilian airlines with anti-missile defense is Israel's national carrier El Al and charter flights. And indeed, back in 2002 in Mombasa, Kenya, terrorists tried to shoot down an Israeli charter flight, and it was able to defeat the missiles. The question is whether the American and the international airline industry are going to be able to go through that expense and whether consumers are going to stand for it.
Peter Brookes, listen, you're a former naval pilot. I know you speak fluent Russian as well. It is still too early to speculate, although there are some clues, the lack of distress signal, the reported size of the wreckage scene here. What is your take on what likely happened to Malaysia Air Flight 17?
My sense is that a Russian surface-to-air missile took down the airliner. The question is whether was it in Ukrainian territory, was it supporting the separatists? In recent days, we've seen a significant increase in the air war in this conflict. There have been some Ukrainian aircraft shot down. There's been some bombings. And my sense, if I had to speculate right now, is that this was obviously some human error involved in this, but they may have believed they were taking down a belligerent aircraft. The big question for me right now, though, is to what level is Russia, Moscow, specifically Moscow, complicit in this? Was this a rogue commander of the Russian forces that may have gone across the border into Ukraine, or if he did so, or if he wasn't a rogue commander, was Moscow somehow give approval for these assets to be moved into Ukraine to be used in the air war there or in the conflict in eastern Ukraine between the separatists and Kiev?
Okay, so again, folks, two possible causes here, Michael, either a tragic accident or some sort of externality, i.e. a bomb or perhaps a missile, as Peter suggested. Taking out the first one, because if it's a tragic accident, it's an accident, we will just simply go on. Michael, if indeed this turns out to be some sort of externality, whether it was a passenger on the plane, a missile, a fighter jet, or what have you, what might, if anything, be the appropriate Western and U.S. response?
Well, Vladimir Putin is starting to play footsies with being a rogue regime. He may want plausible deniability. He may want to blame it on rogue commanders. But if this is Russian equipment that's going to the Russian separatists, and if there's not adequate command and control, that simply is not an excuse. The buck has to stop with the Kremlin, which means we can't just put mild sanctions on Russia. The United States has got to start being serious about the aggression that Vladimir Putin now personifies.
Define serious. I mean being serious.
What you need, for example, is to have overwhelmingly sectorial sanctions. Instead of just sanctioning a couple individuals like we did at first, go after whole sanctions. Actually, the Russian economy is much more tenuous than people believe. Vladimir Putin, before his invasion of Crimea, was being mocked by Russians as being the second coming of Leonid Brezhnev, the former Soviet premier, because of the stagnation that Russia was undergoing. We need to be able to take advantage of that leverage. Unfortunately, today in the White House and the State Department, it seems that leverage has become a dirty word.
You know, Peter, just to wrap up again, we had Jim Woolsey, former director of Central Intelligence, on earlier. He suggested that even if the plane was at 33,000 or so feet, that there were surface-to-air missiles that could be utilized at that range. As a former naval pilot, would there be accurate surface-to-air missiles, or would this have had to also, either inside the plane or perhaps from another plane, come from the sky?
No, Russia has some of the best surface-to-air missiles in the world. They have missiles that would be able to range an aircraft at 33,000 feet. In fact, one of their most strategic systems can send missiles up to 100,000 feet. Definitely within the possibilities of and the capabilities of Russian surface-to-air missiles and anybody else they may have sold them to.
Peter and Michael, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC.